We all wear glasses. The problem is, we have no memory of which glasses we put on or when. We wake up and read the news. Some stories feel obvious, others feel strange. That line between the two, we call it common sense. But where did that line come from? Who drew it? When? And in whose favor was it drawn? We have things we call common sense. Work hard and you succeed. Wealth means someone did something right. Poverty is the outcome of laziness. There's a belief that common sense forms naturally, neutral, self-correcting, that the most rational ideas survive, like natural selection, that what the majority has tested over time becomes common sense, that the common sense person is the rational one, and departing from common sense is irrational, that belief itself is common sense. Strangely, it takes courage to push back against these statements. The person who pushes back becomes the uncomfortable one, an idealist, or someone with too many complaints. Why is that? Common sense looks like something everyone already knows. But more precisely, it's something designed for everyone to believe. Common sense is a pair of glasses. It's the way we see the world itself. We think through those glasses. We judge through them. We act through them. In the early 20th century, an Italian thinker was locked in a cell, Antonio Gramsci. Imprisoned by Mussolini's fascist regime, he wrote thousands of pages inside that cell. Known as the prison notebooks, these pages produced one of the most influential political theories of the 20th century. The question he was trying to solve was simple. Why do oppressed people consent to the system that oppresses them? Gramsci's answer went like this. Power doesn't sustain itself through guns and prisons alone. Real domination happens inside people's heads. When the ruling class's values seep through schools, churches, and the press, they become, at some point, common sense. Not objects of suspicion, something as natural as air. He called this cultural hegemony. The core is simple. The worldview of those who rule becomes the common sense of those who are ruled. And the most critical part of this process? The dominated consent voluntarily. Not by force, by consent. Manufacturing consent is far more efficient than violence. This is not an old theory from a 1930s prison cell. It operates right now, in this moment, in exactly the same way. And there are people for whom that belief is most convenient. The very people who made today's common sense. We're about to look at that structure, starting with one case. In 1938, an American ad agency called N.W. Ayer received an unusual commission from a company called De Beers, not to sell diamonds, to manufacture the desire for diamonds itself. The situation at the time was this. In the 1870s, massive diamond mines were discovered in South Africa. Supply exploded. Where scarcity had been, price collapse followed. De Beers controlled most of the world's diamond supply, but there was no demand. There was a larger problem. In 1930s America, diamonds had no connection to marriage whatsoever. Engagement rings were sapphires, rubies, sometimes no gemstone at all. Diamonds were status symbols for a tiny elite. For most people, useless, a waste of money. N.W. Ayer didn't sell a product. They manufactured a concept. They didn't advertise diamonds directly. Instead, they quietly planted diamonds. In magazine articles, movie props, celebrity engagement announcements. In the media that middle-class readers consumed, diamonds appeared again and again as symbols of romance. Not promoting a brand, making diamonds the language of love itself. Then, in 1947, 4 words appeared. A diamond is forever. The sentence worked in a precise way. If a diamond is the mark of eternal love, selling it or reselling it becomes a betrayal of love. If used diamonds flood the market, supply rises and prices fall. These 4 words were a psychological mechanism, exploiting consumer emotion to control supply. The results showed up in numbers. In 1939, annual diamond sales in the U.S. were $23 million. 40 years later, in 1979, that number was $2.1 billion. Same mineral, but the way people saw it had changed. What changed that perception was not evidence, it was repetition. If it feels like common sense today to put a diamond on an engagement ring, that pair of glasses was made in 1938. And the people who ground those lenses got the most out of that common sense. Was this an exception? One industry's isolated case? No. It's a structurally repeating pattern. Science moves the same way. Let's look at another case. 1960s America. Heart disease was killing middle-aged men in mass numbers. Scientists were searching for the cause. 2 suspects: sugar and fat. Early studies were producing evidence linking both to heart disease. Research pointing to the danger of sugar was growing. For the sugar industry, this was a crisis. The lobbying group, Sugar Research Foundation, moved. They paid 3 Harvard nutrition professors, the equivalent of about $50,000 in today's money. One of them was the chair of Harvard School of Public Health's nutrition department, and simultaneously an advisor to the Sugar Research Foundation. There was one purpose. The purpose was to minimize the dangers of sugar and redirect the blame to fat. Sugar Research Foundation Vice President John Hickson wrote in an internal document, "Our particular interest is in the section dealing with the claim that sugar contributes to heart disease." The Harvard researchers replied, "We are well aware of your particular interest and will handle it as best we can." In 1967, that paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. The conclusion was clear. To prevent heart disease, reduce fat and cholesterol. Sugar is not the problem. The Sugar Research Foundation's funding was disclosed nowhere. At the time, there was no obligation to reveal conflicts of interest. Hickson sent the researchers a letter. "This is exactly what we wanted." One paper produced 50 years of common sense. Fat is bad. Low-fat food is healthy. For decades, America's dietary guidelines were designed around this direction. Low-fat milk, low-fat cookies, low-fat yogurt. They filled the supermarkets. The space left by removing fat was filled with sugar. Obesity rates soared. In 2016, researchers at UC San Francisco discovered the Sugar Research Foundation's internal documents. Their analysis was published in JAMA Internal Medicine. It was a record showing that the sugar industry had intentionally steered the direction of scientific research. The lead researcher, Professor Stanton Glantz, had previously spent decades studying the same strategy used by the tobacco industry. He said, "The sugar industry followed the tobacco industry's playbook." Let's change the question here. Where did the common sense that fat is bad actually come from? It did not come from scientific discovery. Money determined the direction of science. Science determined the direction of common sense. The mechanisms by which common sense hardens in favor of the powerful can be grouped into 3: narrative monopoly, question control, and the technique of repetition. And there are 3 factories that keep these structures running without rest: classrooms and media, headlines, dictionaries. The first mechanism is narrative monopoly. The first factory producing that narrative is classrooms and media. Who makes the stories determines who makes common sense. There's a belief that textbooks are transparent conduits of value-neutral facts. But textbooks are made. Someone decides what goes in and what stays out. Which events get called historical? Which figures get called great? Which perspective gets marked as the correct answer? There is a study published in PLOS ONE in 2024. It ran automated analysis on 1,255 textbooks from 34 countries. The results were clear. In most countries, female figures appeared far less frequently in textbooks than male figures. And when they did appear, they were confined to a far narrower range of roles. This was not an intentional conspiracy. No one issued orders to erase women. But the people concentrated in the seats where textbooks were made shared particular backgrounds, and they assumed their experience was universal. As a result, for decades, hundreds of millions of children grew up reading the world through those biased glasses. That became common sense. UNESCO's analysis of textbooks across multiple countries showed the same pattern. Most history textbooks were written from the victor's perspective. The experiences of the defeated, the voices of minorities, the views from the margins, structurally excluded. What we learned as the correct answer in classrooms was actually the correct answer seen from a particular viewpoint. And we called that common sense. Narrative monopoly doesn't stop at classrooms. Media does the same thing. Take the UK. According to a 2023 report by the Media Reform Coalition, 3 companies control 90% of the national newspaper market: DMG Media, News UK, Reach. More than 40% of the top 50 digital news brands are owned by the same 3 companies. Widen the view to all of Europe. The picture is similar. The EU's Media Pluralism Monitor has 20 indicators measuring the risk of media ownership concentration. The average risk level for the Media Ownership Concentration Indicator in 2024 is 86%, the highest of all 20 indicators. Not a single EU country is classified as low risk. What about the US? As of 2024, 10 companies own a quarter of American newspapers. 3 of those are partly or wholly owned by private equity or hedge funds. According to Northwestern University research, roughly 55 million Americans have limited or no access to local news. That's 16% of the total population. In Belgium, research emerged showing how this concentration actually affects news content. Published in a 2024 journal, the study analyzed approximately 1.42 million articles from 4 major newspapers between 2018 and 2021. The result? Newspapers owned by the same company were producing increasingly similar news content. When ownership concentrates, narrative concentrates. What becomes possible when narrative is monopolized? Every story has a hero and a villain. Who becomes the villain is decided by whoever writes the story. When economic crisis hits, there's a question the news asks: why didn't people save? Regulatory failure, wage stagnation, structural problems in the financial system? Those questions get asked far less. Individual failure becomes common sense. Systemic flaw becomes common nonsense. The second mechanism is question control. The second factory that processes it is headlines. The real power of common sense is not in the answers, it's in the questions. Media does not deliver all the facts in the world. It can't. From the countless events that happen every day, it decides which facts to cover today, which facts to write in large type, which facts to place with images, which facts to repeat. This is called agenda setting. Media doesn't force us what to think, but it decides what to think about. And repeated enough, that becomes what matters. When enough things that matter accumulate, they form the boundary of common sense. The same fact, placed in different frames, produces entirely different conclusions. This is framing. Consider the phrase tax relief. The word relief automatically presupposes suffering, a victim, and a rescuer. The moment this frame is activated, someone who opposes tax cuts becomes a person who wants suffering. Without evidence, without logic, a single word reshapes the terrain of debate. McCaffrey and Barron's 2006 experiment proved this in numbers. Presenting the same tax scenario as a dollar amount versus as a percentage changed what tax rate people preferred on average. In the percentage frame, 17.35%. In the dollar frame, 15.28%. The preference gradient for progressive taxation was also significantly higher in the percentage frame. This experiment is not simply a story about people being bad at math. It's a story about our judgments being far more sensitive to the language surrounding information than to the information itself. And the people who choose that language are sculpting our common sense. Same number, different packaging. Different common sense. In political science, this is called the Overton window. Society, at any given moment, has a range of ideas it finds acceptable. Within that range, rational. Outside it, extreme. The person who first conceptualized this range was an American policy researcher named Joseph Overton in the 1990s. The problem is, who moves the window? The Overton window does not move by itself. Think tanks, media campaigns, and interest groups push it deliberately. A 2025 Quincy Institute report shows this in numbers. For the top 50 U.S. think tanks, the U.S. government has directly provided at least $1.49 billion since 2019. The top 100 defense industry companies contributed over $34.7 million. Foreign governments and their affiliated bodies provided more than $110 million. There's a more striking number. 36% of the top 50 think tanks disclose nothing about where their money comes from, so-called dark money think tanks. Their research findings get cited in news coverage, presented as evidence in congressional hearings, hardened into policy. The source of the money is invisible, but the conclusions become common sense. Tufts political scientist Daniel Drezner said, "Funding a think tank is as valuable as spending on lobbyists, because there's less regulation." When we hear the phrase, "work hard and you can succeed," what do we feel? Most of us agree, reflexively. This is not a fact, it's common sense. And the questions this common sense generates are always the same. Why didn't this person succeed? Was their skill insufficient? Was their effort insufficient? Was their will too weak? There are other questions this common sense blocks. Why do the same efforts receive different rewards? Why are the starting lines different? Why is the cost of failure fatal for some and a minor inconvenience for others? These are questions outside the Overton window. But being outside doesn't mean being wrong. It means the window is positioned that way. The third mechanism is the technique of repetition. The third factory that locks it in is dictionaries. Common sense is not made at once. It solidifies slowly through repetition. As Gramsci noted, schools, media, religion, and cultural institutions repeat the same message in different languages. When this repetition crosses a threshold, people begin to believe it is their own thought. From that moment, common sense no longer looks planted by others, it looks discovered by us. In 2025, Reporters Without Borders announced that economic indicators in the World Press Freedom Index had hit their lowest level ever recorded. The overall state of press freedom was classified for the first time in history as a difficult situation. Media ownership concentration, advertiser pressure, opaque public funding distribution. In 46 countries, media ownership is highly concentrated or entirely controlled by the state. This means the infrastructure of repetition is increasingly concentrated in fewer hands. And the most powerfully repeated language lives in dictionaries. There is a word, self-made. This word carries the story that a person succeeded through their own power alone. But who built the roads they drove on? Who built the schools they graduated from? The hospitals they were treated at? The markets they accessed? The language that was in common use? The contracts that were protected? What structure do those stand on? When alone is the hidden premise inside a word, seeing inequality as an individual problem becomes common sense. The person who didn't climb becomes someone who worked less hard. Structure becomes invisible. Only the individual is seen. Language is not neutral. Language is a frame, and the most widely used language becomes the most powerful common sense. Point the glasses somewhere else. Picture a lazy person. What image surfaces? What job? What setting? What face? We assume the image is our own judgment. It isn't. Thousands of news cycles, dramas, and advertisements ran the same image on repeat. Someone decided which face belongs to the word lazy. We absorbed it, then called it common sense. Classrooms, media, headlines, dictionaries. 4 grinding stations for the lens. The grinders were, almost without exception, beneficiaries of the existing order. Intent is irrelevant. The outcome is not. Common sense hardened in their favor. Watch what happens when the same common sense scales to a nation. Inside the same capitalist system, the narrative infrastructure determines what counts as sense. The United States, Finland, both want better education. The common sense used to get there is not the same. American common sense. Competition produces results. Students ranked by standardized tests. Schools ranked by performance. Resources flow toward the top. Work harder, rise higher. Finnish common sense is different. Cooperation produces results. Tests minimized. Rankings removed. Teachers trusted with autonomy. When a child falls behind, they don't get eliminated. They get more support. OECD PISA 2018. Data. Finnish students, High Cooperation Index, report consistently higher life satisfaction than students in competition-heavy nations. More significant, Finland sustains top-tier academic rankings worldwide using a system with almost no standardized tests. New Zealand ranks high on competition. Its cooperation index sits well below Finland's. Its academic achievement does not surpass Finland's. Same goal, different sense, different result. This is not a question of moral superiority. It is a question of which common sense works for more people. And there are specific people for whom competition produces achievement is convenient. As long as that common sense holds, the system requires no revision. The difference is not national character. It is narrative infrastructure. Nordic countries, high taxes, strong welfare, common sense. United States, low taxes, self-reliance, also common sense. Both democracies, both market economies. Nordic nations operate strong public media. Media ownership is tightly regulated. The United States runs on commercial media dominance. Think tanks and the lobbying industry operate at a scale with no parallel. In other countries, the same economic crisis arrives. Different questions get asked. The same unemployment rate is announced. Different causes get named. When a frame repeats long enough, the frame disappears. Only the fact seems to remain. This is the final stage in which common sense completes itself. Social mobility data makes this sharper. There is a metric called intergenerational income elasticity. It measures how strongly a parent's income determines a child's income. Higher number, parent's position decides child's position. Lower number, individual effort actually operates. The United States, 0.47. The country whose common sense is built on work hard, rise up. Its actual mobility ranks among the lowest in the developed world. Denmark, 0.15. A country designed with thick social safety nets. Individuals move more freely there. If the common sense that welfare breeds laziness were true, the highest welfare nations would show the lowest productivity. Denmark and Finland maintain top-tier labor productivity worldwide. As long as welfare breeds laziness holds as common sense, cutting welfare appears rational, natural, obvious. And the people most comfortable with that common sense are the people who gain most from cutting welfare. So how do we change the structure of these glasses? We are not about to say, think critically. That kind of conclusion demands individual awakening while leaving the structure untouched. Changing the lens is not an eye exercise. It is changing the structure of the factory that makes the glasses. First, force transparency in media ownership. The EU enacted the European Media Freedom Act in 2024, moving to mandate public disclosure of media ownership structures. When ownership is visible, the origin of narrative is visible. When origin is visible, common sense becomes questionable. Second, mandatory disclosure of research funding conflicts of interest. In 1967, this rule did not exist. That is partly how the sugar industry built 50 years of common sense through the New England Journal of Medicine. When the flow of money is visible, the direction of conclusions can be examined. Third, diversity at the decision table. Textbook editorial committees, newsroom editors, policy-making legislatures, corporate boards. These are the seats that define common sense. When those seats are filled only by people of similar background and similar experience, the common sense produced reflects only their experience, and that becomes universal. Research published in Management Science puts numbers to this. Homogeneous groups used an average of 60 meaningful data points in problem solving. Cognitively diverse groups used up to 229. On the same task, information-seeking capacity diverged by more than 3 times. When diverse perspectives sit at the table, a more accurate picture emerges. That is how you build common sense that works for more people. Fourth, embed questioning habits and media literacy into education's structure. Finland integrated media literacy into the national curriculum. In math class, how statistics are manipulated. In history class, deconstruct past propaganda. In language class, study the semantic tricks in news headlines. This is not telling individuals to think critically. This is building the structure inside schools where that thinking is learned. The results appeared in numbers. Cambridge University research. Participants with this education improved fake news detection by up to 12 percentage points. Agreement with misinformation dropped by approximately 20 percentage points. In the Open Society Institute's Media Literacy Index, Finland has not once lost the top position in Europe since adopting this model. The 2023 OECD report named Finland an international benchmark for media literacy education. When citizens are educated to structurally recognize frames, the entire society shifts. Fifth, institutionalize the question itself. Is this obvious? And obvious to whom? Turn these two questions into a policy design checklist. When building institutions, a structure that mandates examining whose perspective the premise starts from. Embedding the procedure of asking, who manufactured this common sense? This is not a call to destroy common sense. Some of it is wisdom that has proven valid for many people across tested time. But even that wisdom needs, at least once, to be held up to the light, checked for fingerprints, verifying the manufacture date and manufacturer of common sense. That is where it starts. Now change the question. Not, is this common sense? But, who made this common sense? Not, why is common sense wrong? But, whose hands did it pass through to get here? Not, does the majority agree? But, what was the path by which the majority came to agree? Not, why is this obvious? But, if this weren't obvious, who would be uncomfortable? Work hard and succeed. We are not saying doubt this statement. Ask, to whom is this most convenient? Poverty is a personal problem. We are not saying deny this sentence. Ask, what system does this sentence protect? That is what must be asked. We cannot remove the glasses. We always see the world inside some frame. That is an unavoidable condition for any being that perceives. The glasses we wear were not made by us. Knowing that we are wearing glasses, knowing that the lens carries fingerprints, knowing that someone left those fingerprints, and occasionally holding the lens up to the light. Those small verifications stop common sense from running automatically. The moment we don't know this, common sense governs us. Common sense is not discovered. It is designed with intent. Installed. Ask yourself now, is the common sense I currently believe to be obvious truly my own thought?